Tonight, drift back to an ocean nothing alive today would recognize, one that existed long before whales, long before anything familiar, and was already claimed by something far older and far more extreme. For 180 million years, air-breathing reptiles ruled every sea on Earth. This is the story of what they were, what they built, and why nothing alive in the ocean today has come close to replacing them. Most people, when they picture the prehistoric ocean, picture sharks, maybe something vaguely monstrous in the deep, some scaled-up version of what still exists today. The assumption is that the ancient ocean was a rougher, larger edition of the one we know, the same cast of animals, just bigger, slower, and more primitive. That assumption is wrong in almost every particular. The ocean that existed before whales was ruled by animals that belonged to a completely different branch of the vertebrate family tree. Not fish, not mammals, reptiles, air-breathing, warm coastal in origin, descended from creatures that had walked on land, had claimed the sea as their primary domain for nearly 180 million years. The earliest of these animals appeared around 250 million years ago, in the immediate aftermath of an extinction event so severe it nearly erased complex life from the planet entirely. What came next was not a slow, orderly recovery. It was a scramble, and the animals that moved fastest into the vacated ecological space became the foundation of a dynasty that would outlast almost everything that came after it. To understand how dominant these animals were, it helps to place their timeline against something more familiar. Whales, which most people think of as ancient ocean creatures, have been in the water for a fraction of that span. The marine reptile dynasty that preceded them ran nearly 4 times longer. That is not a marginal difference in tenure. It is a different order of magnitude entirely. But here is what that scramble actually required. Moving into the ocean is not simply a matter of an animal deciding water is preferable to land. The ocean is a hostile environment for anything that breathes air. It offers no rest, no purchase, no shelter from predators above a certain size, and no margin for the kinds of inefficiencies that land animals routinely survive. An animal that enters the ocean still shaped primarily for land will be outcompeted by the fish and invertebrates already there, which have had hundreds of millions of years longer to optimize for exactly those conditions. The fossil record shows, repeatedly and without exception, what happens to animals that enter the ocean without the adaptations to hold their position in it. They disappear, leaving no descendants and no trace beyond the bones. But the Permian-Triassic extinction had changed that calculus entirely. Nearly 96% of marine species were gone. The ecological positions that fish and invertebrates had spent hundreds of millions of years developing were suddenly vacant, and the competitive pressure that would normally have excluded a poorly adapted land animal from the water had been removed almost completely. The ocean, for a brief window in geological time, was something it had never been before, accessible, and the land animals that moved fastest into that window did not need to be perfect ocean creatures to survive. They only needed to be less bad at it than anything else currently trying. But that window did not stay open indefinitely. As marine ecosystems began recovering, as prey populations rebuilt, and predator diversity increased, the animals that had entered the ocean during the vacancy faced a new problem. The ocean that was easy to enter was becoming harder to hold. Every generation that passed raised the bar for what it meant to be competitive in that environment. And the dynasty that eventually emerged from that pressure was shaped at every stage by what the ocean was becoming rather than by what it had been when the first land reptiles entered it. What the fossil record tells us is not a story of gradual replacement, but one of sudden vacancy and rapid occupation. The ocean before whales was not empty, not calm, and not waiting. It was already claimed by creatures that had made the same journey from land to sea tens of millions of years earlier, under conditions far more brutal than anything modern oceans present. The Permian-Triassic extinction left the seas near lifeless, and the survivors that eventually filled those waters did so not because they were born for the ocean, but because the ocean was all that remained of any opportunity. That is, the actual origin of the dynasty, not design, desperation. These reptiles held the ocean for roughly 180 million years. To put that number in proportion, whales have existed for approximately 50 million years, and modern humans have existed for around 300,000. The marine reptile lineages that arose from the wreckage of the Permian extinction outlasted nearly every other group of large vertebrates that has ever lived. Their legs shortened, flattened, and eventually became paddles. Their tails lengthened and stiffened into propulsion systems. Their lungs expanded to hold oxygen through dives that could last minutes. None of this happened by intention. Each small change that helped an individual survive long enough to reproduce was passed forward, accumulated over generations, stretching across millions of years, until the animal that emerged bore almost no resemblance to the land creature it had descended from. The ocean before whales was not a lesser version of what exists today. It was a fully occupied, fiercely contested world, ruled by animals that held it for 3.5 times longer than whales have managed so far, and across a far greater range of body sizes, hunting strategies, and ecological roles than any single lineage alive in the ocean today. If you're finding this interesting, a like helps more people find it while they sleep. Back to the story. Before any of those giants could exist, something had to go first. There was a moment, roughly 240 million years ago, when a reptile crossed from shore into the shallows and did not fully return. Neither fully committed to land, nor capable of surviving open water, caught at the edge of something the ocean had not yet made room for. What that animal looked like, what it could and could not do, and whether anything alive today descended from it, that is where this story actually begins. The ocean does not invite animals in. It has to be entered gradually at considerable cost over spans of time that make the entire history of human civilization look brief. Every lineage that ever became fully marine went through a period of partial commitment first, a phase where the animal was neither fully at home on land nor fully suited to the water, caught between two worlds, exploiting whichever one offered the most immediate return. For reptiles, that transitional phase has a name and a fossil record to go with it. Nothosaurs lived roughly 240 to 210 million years ago during the Triassic, and they were unlike anything that had existed in the ocean before them. They still had 4 functional limbs and could still haul themselves onto shore, but their anatomy already carried the first signs of being shaped by a new environment in the structure of their feet, the flexibility of their spines, and the configuration of their jaws. They were committed to neither world and useful in both, spending their time in the coastal shallows of the ancient Tethys Sea, a warm, shallow ocean that once stretched across what is now Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. The Tethys Sea at that time was a different kind of ocean from anything that exists today, shallower, warmer, and concentrated along the margins of a supercontinent that was only beginning to break apart. Nothosaur fossils have been pulled from rock formations across the full former extent of that basin, suggesting that wherever the right coastal conditions existed, nothosaurs were there exploiting them. They were not large by the standards of what would come later. Some reached around 4 meters, a few species slightly more. But size was not the point. But partial commitment carries a cost that full commitment does not. An animal that can live on land and hunt in the water is never fully optimized for either. Its legs, functional enough for hauling onto shore, create drag in water. Its lung capacity, adequate for a land animal of its size, limits how long it can remain submerged and how deep it can pursue prey before needing to surface. Its metabolism, calibrated for the metabolic demands of a semi-terrestrial lifestyle, may not be efficient enough for the sustained effort that open water hunting requires. Nothosaurs occupied a position that was ecologically viable, but only for as long as the conditions that made it viable persisted. But the Tethys Sea was not a stable environment. It was a geological work in progress, shaped by the slow fragmentation of the supercontinent Pangaea, which was pulling apart throughout the Triassic and reshaping the coastlines and water depths that nothosaurs depended on. Sea levels fluctuated. Coastal habitats that existed in another, the warm, shallow hunting grounds that suited a semi-aquatic predator, were not guaranteed to remain available across the millions of years that nothosaurs needed to persist. And other animals were entering the ocean during the same period, animals that were committing more completely, evolving more rapidly toward full marine life, and beginning to occupy the ecological space that nothosaurs had been the first to claim. But the most fundamental tension in the Nothosaur story is what the fossil record has not yet settled. Whether nothosaurs gave rise to plesiosaurs, or whether they ran as a parallel experiment that ended without descendants. A lineage that committed to the water, persisted for millions of years, and then simply stopped. The transitional fossils that would resolve that question have not been found. The anatomical case for a connection exists. So does the possibility that nothosaurs were their own branch entirely, reaching toward the ocean in the same period and from the same starting conditions as the ancestors of plesiosaurs, but arriving nowhere. The fossil record on this point has not yet been decided. What nothosaurs answer is the question of how any land animal becomes a marine one, not in theory, but in the actual fossil record. The answer is that it does not happen all at once. Nothosaurs were not ocean animals. They were land animals with increasingly useful traits for the water: webbed feet, a flexible spine suited for undulating swimming, eyes positioned for underwater vision, and jaws built for catching slippery prey. They waded in, they hunted near the shore, they returned to land. For millions of years, that was enough. What makes nothosaurs significant is not their power. They were not the largest or most dangerous animals of their time, but the fact that their fossils mark the precise moment in geological history when the ocean became available to reptiles as a habitat rather than just an obstacle. Before nothosaurs, the seas were dominated by fish and invertebrates. The Permian extinction had cleared enormous ecological space at every level of the marine food chain, and nothosaurs were among the first vertebrates to begin exploiting it from the shoreline inward. Their fossils, found across the ancient Tethys Sea, from what is now China to Germany to the Middle East, show that this coastal expansion was not isolated. It was happening simultaneously across a vast connected body of water, wherever the conditions were right. The line from nothosaur to plesiosaur, if the paleontological consensus holds, is the line from testing the water to owning it. The anatomy changed slowly. The webbed foot became the paddle. The partially streamlined body became fully hydrodynamic. The animal that still hauled itself onto rock to rest eventually stopped returning to shore at all. Nothosaurs did not complete that journey, but without them, the journey never begins. But the Nothosaur was only the beginning of what the ocean would make from a reptile willing to enter it. Once the commitment was made, fully, permanently, without any path back to shore, the ocean started reshaping everything. The body, the limbs, the eyes. What eventually emerged looked nothing like the animal that had waded in, and almost exactly like an animal that would not evolve for another 200 million years. What matters is not just what that shape looked like, it is what the animals that carried it could do in waters no other predator could follow them into. By the time ichthyosaurs appear in the fossil record, the hesitancy of the Nothosaur phase was already over. Ichthyosaurs were not testing the water. They had committed to it completely, and the fossil record of that commitment is one of the most extraordinary documents in the entire history of vertebrate evolution. These animals first appeared around 248 million years ago. Shortly after the Permian-Triassic extinction had cleared the seas of the organisms that had dominated them for hundreds of millions of years before. What ichthyosaurs looked like is the first thing that stops most people when they encounter them. The body is torpedo-shaped, tapering smoothly from a wide chest down to a narrow tailstock. The tail itself fans into a crescent shape, high and stiff. The snout is long and narrow, lined with teeth suited for gripping fast prey. The eyes, in many species, are disproportionately large. A reconstruction without context would be described by almost anyone as a dolphin, and that resemblance is not accidental. It is the product of the same set of forces acting on a similar problem across an enormous span of time. The key difference is ancestry. Dolphins evolved from land mammals. Ichthyosaurs evolved from land reptiles, separated from dolphins by hundreds of millions of years and an entirely different evolutionary lineage. That they arrived at the same form, independently from different starting points, is what makes ichthyosaurs one of the most instructive examples in the fossil record of how the ocean shapes the animals that enter it. The question is, what exactly did it build from that shape once it had it? But the dolphin comparison, useful as it is for visualization, obscures something important. Dolphins are social animals. They communicate, cooperate in hunting, care for young over extended periods, and maintain group structures that influence how and where they feed. Ichthyosaurs left no evidence of any of this. What the fossil record preserves is anatomy and, occasionally, gut contents, not behavior in any richer sense. The body plan tells us what ichthyosaurs were physically capable of. It does not tell us how they actually used those capabilities across the full range of environments they occupied, or whether the strategies that worked for early ichthyosaurs in the Triassic were the same strategies their Jurassic descendants were still running 50 million years later. But the decline makes the picture more complicated still. Ichthyosaurs were not wiped out by a sudden event. By 90 million years ago, their diversity had contracted sharply, with far fewer species remaining than had existed during their Jurassic peak. And this contraction happened across multiple ocean basins simultaneously, which rules out local ecological disruption as an explanation. Something systemic was changing. The seas themselves were shifting. Temperatures, currents, the distribution of prey species, and ichthyosaurs were not producing the adaptive variation that the new ocean was selecting for. The contraction was not confined to one region or one size class. It was happening everywhere at once, which meant whatever was driving it was operating at a scale larger than any single ecological pressure could account for. But the deepest tension in the ichthyosaur story is what their disappearance left behind. For tens of millions of years, ichthyosaurs had been the primary high-speed pursuit predators in the open ocean. The animals that fish and cephalopods in open water were most likely to be killed by. When that predator pressure was removed, the communities it had been shaping for all that time were suddenly subject to different pressures from different directions. The ocean that plesiosaurs and eventually mosasaurs inherited was not the same ocean ichthyosaurs had dominated. It had already changed around the absence they left. What ichthyosaurs prove, more clearly than any other prehistoric animal, is that the ocean has only so many ways to build an efficient predator, and evolution will find those same solutions every time something new enters the water. The dolphin shape is not a dolphin invention. Ichthyosaurs arrived at that exact body plan 200 million years before the first cetacean existed, driven by the same physics of drag, thrust, and maneuverability that shaped dolphins later. This is convergent evolution at its most precise, and it is the reason ichthyosaurs could do what they did. Shonisaurus sicaniensis, a giant ichthyosaur from Canada, reached over 21 meters in length, making it one of the largest animals to have ever existed, in a body plan that no mammal would independently rediscover for another 200 million years. The eyes are where ichthyosaurs become genuinely extraordinary. Temnodontosaurus, one of the larger early ichthyosaurs, had eyes measuring nearly 26 centimeters in diameter, the largest confirmed eyes of any vertebrate in the fossil record. Eyes that size are not general purpose. They are built for one specific condition: hunting in very low light, at depth, where no competitor can follow. Ichthyosaurs were not just surface predators chasing fish in sunlit shallows. Some were deep-water hunters operating in near darkness, using vision that no other animal in the Jurassic Ocean could match. That is an ecological niche that took cetaceans millions of years to develop tools for. Echolocation in dolphins, the deep-diving physiology of sperm whales. Ichthyosaurs had a structural answer to that same challenge, built directly into their skulls. Their decline is where certainty ends. By 90 million years ago, ichthyosaur diversity had collapsed dramatically, not from an asteroid, not from a single catastrophic event, but from a combination of shifting ocean temperatures, collapsing prey communities, and rising competition from predators that are suited to the seas that were replacing the ones ichthyosaurs had been built for. The exact weighting of those causes remains contested. What is not contested is that they were gone 25 million years before the mass extinction that ended the dinosaurs, which means no single catastrophe explains them. They were displaced by a world that had changed around them faster than they could change in return. But ichthyosaurs were not the only answer the ocean produced. Around 200 million years ago, a second lineage entered the water, and it arrived at a completely different set of solutions. Where ichthyosaurs were built for speed, this group was built around something that looks, at first, like a liability. A neck so long it seems incompatible with effective hunting in an animal that could not simply chase down its prey. How a predator that size fed itself with a structure that unwieldy? And why that strategy kept it alive for 135 million years is what the fossil record of plesiosaurs takes a long time to answer. Around 200 million years ago, a second major lineage of marine reptiles entered the ocean, and they looked nothing like ichthyosaurs. Where ichthyosaurs were streamlined, built for speed, shaped by the demands of open water pursuit, plesiosaurs were built around an entirely different set of physical priorities. The body was wide and relatively flat. The limbs had become 4 large flat paddles rather than the fish-like fins of ichthyosaurs. And the neck, in many species, extended to lengths that seem almost implausible for a functional predator. Plesiosaurs split early in their history into 2 groups, and the split is so pronounced that the 2 forms look like they belong to different animals entirely. One group shortened the neck and enlarged the skull, moving toward a concentrated predatory force that the long-necked branch never attempted. The other group took the opposite direction, shrinking the head, multiplying the neck vertebrae, and producing animals whose necks could account for more than half of their total body length. Elasmosaurus, one of the most well-known long-necked plesiosaurs, carried 76 neck vertebrae. No other vertebrae in the fossil record comes close to that number. What that neck was actually for, how an animal nearly 14 meters long deployed a structure of that size to feed itself, occupied paleontologists for decades. The anatomy itself raised the question clearly enough. What the anatomy could not answer without additional evidence was the mechanism. A neck that long, in a predator that size, could serve several different functions. Determining which one it actually served required more than a skeleton. But the neck created physical costs that no other large marine predator of the period had to absorb. A plesiosaur carrying 76 neck vertebrae was also carrying a structure that imposed real constraints on movement through water, on speed, on direction change, on the energy required to hold position against a current. Those physical costs were not incidental. They were the central fact that any hunting strategy built around a neck of that length had to account for. And they shaped what plesiosaurs could and could not do in the water more directly than almost any other aspect of their anatomy. But the gastroliths raise a question that the leading explanation does not fully close. Swallowing stones is a behavior that requires deliberate action. An animal has to seek out appropriate rocks which are not found on the open seafloor and ingest them intentionally. Some plesiosaur specimens have been found with dozens of gastroliths weighing several kilograms in total. The buoyancy hypothesis, that the stones help maintain depth without constant muscular effort, is the most widely cited interpretation, but it carries its own assumptions about how plesiosaurs actually positioned themselves during a hunt, and those assumptions are not universally accepted. The stones are real. What they were actually for remains a more open question than the standard account suggests. But the most direct challenge to plesiosaurs came not from the environment, but from the other branch of their own family. While long-necked plesiosaurs were refining a strategy built on patience and precision, plesiosaurs were evolving in a direction that patience could not compete with. A pliosaur did not need to wait for prey to drift within range of a slow, lateral sweep. It could locate prey, close the distance faster than most animals in the Jurassic Ocean could react, and apply a force that no amount of evasion could survive. These were not competing strategies in the abstract. In the same body of water, at the same time, plesiosaurs were prey. What plesiosaurs demonstrate is that in a stable, resource-rich ocean, patience is a competitive strategy. Speed works, but so does waiting. The long-necked plesiosaurs like Elasmosaurus were not built for pursuit. With 76 vertebrae in a neck that could account for more than half the animal's total length, they could not swing that neck quickly enough to chase fast prey in open water. What they could do was position it, drift in slowly above a school of fish, hold the body still, which, given the 4 large paddles generating independent thrust, was something they could do with remarkable precision, and sweep the neck through the school in a single lateral strike before anything had time to scatter. The gastroliths found in plesiosaur stomach cavities had another layer to this picture: swallowed stones, sometimes dozens of them, sitting in the gut. The leading explanation is buoyancy control, that the weight of the stones helped plesiosaurs maintain a specific depth without constant muscular effort, the same way a submarine uses ballast. This would make the drift and strike hunting method far more viable. An animal that can hover effortlessly at mid-water depth, burning minimal energy, becomes a very different kind of predator than one that must constantly swim to stay in position. Plesiosaurs survived for 135 million years, not because they were the fastest or most powerful animals in the ocean, but because the strategy they built, slow, precise, patient, worked across an enormous range of ocean conditions across geological time. They outlasted the ichthyosaurs. They survived through changing seas and shifting prey populations. They died only when the food chain beneath them collapsed entirely at the end of the Cretaceous, not because their strategy failed, but because there was nothing left for any strategy to work on. But patience was not the only strategy the plesiosaur lineage produced. The same family that gave the ocean its most methodical hunters also gave it something at the opposite extreme. An animal built entirely around applying maximum force at the moment of contact, in a way that patience had no answer to. The short-necked branch of the plesiosaur family was moving toward a different objective entirely. What that objective looked like, what it could do with a skull larger than most animals it encountered, and why nothing in the Jurassic Ocean ever challenged it, that is the next part of this history. The short-necked branch of the plesiosaur lineage took a different path from the start. While long-necked plesiosaurs were developing their patient, precision-based approach to feeding, the plesiosaurs, the broad-skulled, short-necked members of the same family, were moving in the opposite direction entirely. Every aspect of their anatomy points toward a single objective: generating maximum force against large prey in the shortest possible time. The skull is where that objective is most visible. Pliosaur skulls are not just large relative to body size, they are large in absolute terms, in ways that stop making intuitive sense when you try to hold the scale in mind. Pliosaurus funke, known informally as Predator X, was excavated from Svalbard in the Norwegian Arctic in the mid-2000s. To compare it against something familiar, the skull of a large great white shark fits comfortably in the back of a car. The skull of Predator X would not fit through most garage doors. The jaw muscles anchored to it generated a bite force that exceeded any land predator ever measured, before or since. What makes plesiosaurs interesting beyond the raw scale of their predatory equipment is the way that equipment was packaged. Despite carrying a skull the size of a small car and a body mass to match, plesiosaurs were not slow. Their paddle limbs were long enough and powerful enough to accelerate at speeds their mass should have made impossible, generating bursts of movement that gave prey animals almost no time to react once a plesiosaur had committed to a strike. But the size that made plesiosaurs so dominant also imposed limits that smaller predators did not face. An animal the size of Predator X required an enormous amount of food to sustain itself. Not occasionally, but continuously across a lifespan that likely extended decades. Apex predators at that size are always vulnerable to disruptions in prey availability because their energy requirements leave almost no margin for periods of scarcity. When prey populations declined, whether from environmental shifts, disease, or the ordinary volatility of marine ecosystems across geological time, a plesiosaur could not simply switch to smaller prey the way a more generalist predator might. The jaw, built for the largest prey in the ocean, was not built for the smallest. But the fossil record of plesiosaur decline offers no clean explanation. Around 150 million years ago, the large pliosaur lineages contracted, not abruptly, but steadily, over a span of millions of years. Sea levels were changing during this period, altering the shallow coastal environments where large prey concentrations tended to be highest. Some prey species that plesiosaurs had depended on were themselves declining. The same environmental pressures that were reshaping the ocean in the late Jurassic were hitting the animals at the very top of the food chain hardest, because those animals had the least flexibility in what they could eat and where they could find it. But what no analysis of plesiosaur decline can fully account for is the gap it created, a gap that was not filled for millions of years. The ecological role that plesiosaurs had occupied at the Jurassic apex was not simply taken over by the next largest predator. What plesiosaurs had built across tens of millions of years could not be reconstructed quickly, because the particular combination of traits that had produced them, the skull dimensions, the bite mechanics, the speed despite mass, was rare enough in the history of vertebrate evolution that it had appeared exactly once. The ocean, when it lost plesiosaurs, lost something it would not find a way to produce again. Predator X is the answer to the question of what the ocean produces when predatory pressure accumulates over tens of millions of years with no effective check. A skull over 2 meters long, a bite force of 33,000 newtons, 4 paddles each exceeding 3 meters, generating speed that the animal's mass should have made impossible. Pliosaurs were not the largest animals in the Jurassic Ocean in terms of sheer length. Some ichthyosaurs matched or exceeded them, but they were the most concentrated expression of killing capacity the ocean had ever produced at that point. The fossil evidence is direct. Plesiosaur bones with bite marks that match the jaw dimensions of large pliosaurs have been recovered from multiple sites, confirming that plesiosaurs were not just theoretically capable of killing other marine reptiles, they were actually doing it. In an ocean that already contained large ichthyosaurs, sharks, and predatory fish, plesiosaurs occupied a position above all of them. Nothing in the Jurassic Sea targeted plesiosaurs. Nothing in the fossil record suggests any predator attempted it. That is a degree of dominance that very few animals in the history of life have ever achieved. When plesiosaurs declined around 150 million years ago, the vacancy they left was not small. The top of the Jurassic marine food chain had been held by one group for tens of millions of years, and when that group faded, the causes still debated, likely tied to sea level changes and shifting prey availability. Nothing alive at the time was yet capable of filling it at the same scale. That gap would persist for millions of years before anything came close to occupying it. The ocean's apex position had been defined by plesiosaurs, and the definition stood long after the animals themselves were gone. But plesiosaurs were gone by 150 million years ago, and the vacancy they left at the top of the ocean's food chain did not stay empty. Something filled it, and the animal that eventually claimed that position was not a product of a long marine ancestry. It descended from a land animal. Its closest living relatives today dig burrows and climb trees. The speed at which it transformed from coastal opportunist to planetary ruler, and what it could do that no marine predator before it had managed, is where the Cretaceous ocean becomes something unlike anything that came before it. When the Jurassic period gave way to the Cretaceous, the ocean inherited by the new era was a different ocean from the one Plesiosaurs had ruled. Sea levels were changing. Ocean temperatures were shifting. The prey communities that had supported the Jurassic apex predators were restructuring around new species and new distributions. Into this changed ocean, something unexpected was moving. An animal group that, by any reasonable prior assessment, had no business being there at all. Mosasaurs were not the product of a long marine ancestry. Their closest living relatives are monitor lizards, large, four-legged, terrestrial reptiles that today climb trees and dig burrows in desert environments. The common ancestor of mosasaurs and monitors was almost certainly a land animal, possibly a coastal one that spent time near water in the way that modern water monitors do. At some point in the late Cretaceous, that lineage entered the ocean. The limbs began to flatten. The tail elongated and developed a fin. The body adopted the same streamlined profile that the ocean has always demanded from anything large enough to require speed. The geological speed of that transition is striking. Mosasaurs appear first in the fossil record as relatively small coastal predators, and within a span of time that is short by the standards of every marine transition that preceded them. Some had grown to sizes that placed them firmly at the top of every food chain in every ocean on the planet. What that size actually looked like, and what they did with it, is where the mosasaur story becomes something different from anything that came before in this history. But the speed of mosasaur expansion created a vulnerability that only became visible in retrospect. A lineage that transforms from coastal opportunist to planetary apex predator in a geologically short time is a lineage that has not had millions of years to accumulate the physiological redundancy that older, more established marine groups possessed. Ichthyosaurs, by the time they reached peak diversity, had been in the ocean long enough that different species had spread across every depth, every temperature range, every prey type the ocean offered. Mosasaurs reached global distribution rapidly, but that distribution was built on a narrower ecological foundation than it appeared from the outside. But the jaw, for all its advantages, carried a constraint. Mosasaurs that swallowed prey whole were dependent on prey that could be swallowed. Animals below a certain size threshold relative to the mosasaur consuming them. A Tylosaurus at 14 meters could eat almost anything it encountered, but a juvenile mosasaur, or a smaller species occupying a regional niche, had a much more restricted prey range. The flexibility that the double-hinged jaw provided at maximum size did not transfer evenly down the size spectrum. And in an ocean where mosasaurs were competing with each other, as well as with large sharks and other predators, the individuals that could not yet access the full range of available prey were under pressure from every direction. But the clearest sign that mosasaur dominance was more precarious than it appeared is what was already happening to the ocean around them. The western interior seaway was closing. Sea levels were dropping across multiple ocean basins. The prey communities that mosasaurs had been tracking across their 20 million year reign were restructuring in ways that favored smaller, faster, more adaptable predators over the largest mosasaur species. The dynasty was under pressure from environmental change, and whether it could have answered that pressure given more time is a question that events arrived to foreclose. before the answer became clear. What mosasaurs reveal is how fast a lineage can transform when the conditions are right. They were not ancient marine reptiles with hundreds of millions of years of ocean ancestry. They descended from monitor lizard-like animals, four-legged, terrestrial, air-breathing, and within a geologically short period, produced animals that reached 17 meters in length and ruled every ocean basin on the planet simultaneously. The transition that took ichthyosaurs millions of years, mosasaurs compressed into a fraction of that time. The result was the same: complete ecological dominance. The double-hinged jaw is the detail that separates mosasaurs from everything that came before them in terms of predatory range. Most predators are limited by the size of prey they can process. A plesiosaur could bite through almost anything, but it still had to tear prey apart to consume it. Mosasaurs, with jaws that could flex and expand like a snake's, could swallow prey nearly as wide as their own skull. That meant sharks, sea turtles, large fish, marine birds, and other mosasaurs all fell within their functional prey range. The fossilized stomach contents confirm it. A Tylosaurus specimen was found with the remains of a smaller mosasaur inside it. They were not selective. They ate what was available, regardless of what it was. For roughly 20 million years, mosasaurs held every ocean basin simultaneously, without challenge. No region was outside their range. No habitat type, shallow seaway, open ocean, coastal shelf, lacked them. Mosasaur fossils have been recovered from every continent, including Antarctica. The ocean, by the late Cretaceous, was theirs entirely. What ended that dominance was not a competitor. It was something that gave no warning and allowed no adaptation. Understanding how mosasaurs reached their largest sizes and their highest diversity requires understanding the environment that produced those extremes. For roughly 25 million years, a shallow inland sea split North America from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean, an enclosed, warm, nutrient-saturated body of water unlike anything in the modern world. What lived in it, what competed inside it, and why its closure changed the conditions that mosasaurs depended on in ways that would not become fully visible until the very end of the Cretaceous. That is what the Western Interior Seaway preserves in its fossil record. During the late Cretaceous, the geography of North America was nothing like what it is today. The continent was lower, not just geographically, but in terms of sea level relative to land, and a warm, shallow body of water had flooded through the interior, splitting North America from north to south along a corridor stretching from what is now the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. This was the Western Interior Seaway, and for roughly 25 million years, it was the most biologically concentrated body of water on the planet. The seaway was around 1,000 kilometers wide at its broadest and rarely exceeded 900 meters in depth. Those dimensions made it unlike the open ocean. It was more like an enormous corridor of warm, shallow water carrying the biological productivity of a coastal shelf across an area the size of a continent, with the warmth of a tropical sea and none of the cold. Nutrient-poor dead zones that deep ocean basins tend to produce. Conditions like that do not just support life, they generate it, accumulate it, and concentrate it in ways that open ocean environments, with their vast dilution of space, never quite match. The fossil record from the seaway reflects those conditions in detail that no other comparable environment in the world can match. Articulated skeletons, specimens found with bones still in their original anatomical positions, are recovered from seaway formations at a rate that makes paleontologists working in other regions genuinely envious. The preservation is exceptional because the seaway's shallow, sediment-rich environment buried carcasses quickly before scavengers or current could disperse the bones. But the same shallowness that made the seaway so productive also made it unstable over geological time. A sea that rarely exceeded 900 meters in depth was sensitive to changes in sea level in ways that deep ocean basins were not. A modest global drop in sea level could drain enormous portions of the seaway's area, destroying the shallow water habitat that most of its species depended on. And sea levels during the late Cretaceous were not stable. They were declining, slowly but measurably, driven by changes in the rate of seafloor spreading and the cooling of ocean crust. The seaway that had existed at its maximum extent, splitting North America from pole to gulf, was already contracting by the time the most dramatic events of the late Cretaceous began to unfold. But the density of predators in the seaway also meant that it was an environment under constant, intense competitive pressure. The largest predators in the seaway were large enough to attack each other. The fastest were fast enough to compete directly with apex hunters for the same prey. Every animal in the seaway, regardless of size, was operating within a web of competitive pressure that extended in multiple directions simultaneously, and in an environment that concentrated prey, it also concentrated the things that hunted prey, which meant that competition for food was never far from direct confrontation. But the seaway's closure did not happen gradually enough for the ecosystems it contained to adapt. The species that had evolved for the seaway's specific conditions, its warmth, its shallowness, its enclosed geography, faced a fundamentally different ocean when that geography was gone. The mosasaurs that remained after the closure were reduced in diversity and compressed in range, operating in open ocean conditions that the seaway had never required them to master. The conditions that had made the seaway the most productive hunting ground in the late Cretaceous were gone, and the conditions replacing them continued to deteriorate. What the Western Interior Seaway explains is why the late Cretaceous fossil record for marine life is so dense, so detailed, and so revealing. A shallow inland sea, rarely deeper than 900 meters, flooded with nutrients, warm year-round, and teeming with prey at every scale. These were the conditions under which mosasaurs reached their largest sizes and highest diversity. The seaway was not incidental to their success. It was the engine of it. Archelon, the largest turtle ever recorded at 2.2 meters wide, lived in the seaway. Xiphactinus, a predatory fish reaching 6 meters, was common enough to appear in multiple articulated specimens. Cretoxyrhina, a 7-meter shark contemporaneous with mosasaurs, was large enough that mosasaur bones have been found bearing its bite marks, evidence that even apex predators were not immune to attack. The seaway was not a peaceful environment. It was dense, with large predators competing for the same resources, which means the fossil record from it is essentially a snapshot of an entire functioning ecosystem, preserved in remarkable completeness. When sea levels dropped around 70 million years ago and the seaway closed, the consequences extended well beyond the loss of a single body of water. The ecosystems that had developed over millions of years in that warm, shallow environment had no equivalent replacement. Mosasaurs that had thrived in the seaway's conditions faced a fundamentally changed ocean, colder in some regions, with prey populations disrupted and habitat ranges compressed. The seaway's closure did not kill mosasaurs directly, but it weakened the ecological foundation they depended on, And when the asteroid arrived, 4 million years later, there was almost nothing left to absorb the impact. But knowing what these animals were is different from knowing what they actually did. The fossil record gives anatomy, it gives gut contents and bite marks. What it does not give without considerable interpretation is behavior, the actual sequence of events in the water, in the dark, in the moments before a strike. Over the past 2 decades, new methods of reading fossils have started closing that gap. What they reveal about how ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, and mosasaurs divided the ocean between them, and what happened when that division broke down, is more specific and more unsettling than the anatomy alone suggested. For most of the history of paleontology, the question of how prehistoric marine reptiles hunted was answered largely by anatomy. A long neck suggested ambush. A streamlined body suggested pursuit. Large teeth suggested large prey. The logic was reasonable. The same logic applied to modern predators tends to produce accurate conclusions, but it left enormous gaps in the actual behavioral picture, and some of those gaps turned out to contain surprises. Over the past 2 decades, new analytical tools have allowed paleontologists to move beyond anatomy into evidence of actual behavior. Melanosome analysis, the study of pigment-producing structures preserved in fossilized skin, has provided data on the coloration of some marine reptiles, which in turn has implications for how they position themselves relative to prey. Bite mark analysis has matched specific tooth morphologies to specific wounds on prey bones, allowing researchers to reconstruct individual attacks with a level of precision that was not previously possible. Gut content preservation in articulated specimens has revealed not just what these animals ate, but in what sequence and how large those prey items actually were relative to the predator consuming them. What the behavioral evidence begins to make clear is that the ocean these animals shared was divided in ways that anatomy alone could not have predicted, and that the division was not accidental, but was the accumulated result of millions of years of predator and prey shaping each other in a confined and fiercely competitive environment. But behavioral division only works as a coexistence strategy if the boundaries between hunting zones hold. When prey populations declined, when fish schools thinned, when cephalopod communities contracted, when the usual targets of a given predator became harder to find, those boundaries broke down. A pliosaur that could not find large prey did not starve quietly. It expanded its search into ranges where smaller predators were operating. A mosasaur in a depleted coastal environment moved into open water where ichthyosaurs had historically been the dominant pursuit predators. The functional division of the ocean into non-competing hunting zones was a product of abundance. Scarcity collapsed it. But the evidence for inward competition, mosasaurs attacking and eating other mosasaurs, points to something that opportunism alone cannot explain. Healed bite marks indicate attacks that the victim survived, which means these were not exclusively predatory events resulting in consumption. Some were encounters between animals of similar size, driven by something the fossil record cannot name directly. But the pattern of those marks, their location on the body, and the frequency with which they appear suggests that when prey availability narrowed past a certain threshold, what followed was not simply predation. It was something else entirely, and the bones carry the evidence of it without providing the context. But the hunting strategies themselves raise a question the behavioral evidence has only partially answered. For ichthyosaurs, for plesiosaurs, for pliosaurs, the strategies reconstructed from fossil analysis are inferences, not observations. Melanosome data gives coloration, not behavior. Bite marks on bones confirm an attack occurred, not the sequence of events that led to it. Gut contents reveal what was eaten, not how it was caught. The picture is more detailed than it was 30 years ago, but every reconstruction of a specific hunting event is still built on probabilities rather than certainties. What these animals actually did in the dark water, in the moments before a strike, that part of the record is gone. The reason so many large predators could share the same ocean at the same time is that they were not, in fact, competing for the same prey in the same way. Ichthyosaurs were high-speed pursuit predators targeting fast-moving fish and cephalopods in open water. Plesiosaurs were ambush hunters working at mid-depth, using patience and precision rather than speed. Pliosaurs attacked from below at burst velocity, targeting large prey that other predators couldn't handle. Mosasaurs were generalists with sensory systems that let them hunt effectively in low visibility, eating almost anything they encountered. The ocean is large enough and deep enough to support multiple strategies simultaneously, and these animals had divided it not just geographically, but functionally. The sensory evidence is the part that tends to get overlooked. Mosasaur jaws carried pressure-sensitive pits similar to those found in modern crocodilians, allowing them to detect the movement of prey through water displacement rather than sight alone. This is not a minor adaptation. In murky coastal water or at night, a predator that can feel prey moving nearby has an enormous advantage over one that relies entirely on vision. It is also one of the reasons mosasaur hunting behavior is now compared less to large fish and more to crocodilians, patient, sensory-driven, and opportunistic, rather than purely pursuit-based. The hunting strategies of these animals were not random variations. Each one was a specific answer to a specific ecological problem, shaped by millions of years of pressure from both prey and competitors. The hued mosasaur bite marks on mosasaur fossils confirm that competition sometimes turned inward. When prey was scarce, they ate each other. That is not a failure of strategy. That is a strategy working exactly as evolution designed it to. Survive by any means the environment makes available. But none of what these animals had built, the strategies, the body plans, the 180 million years of accumulated dominance, was enough to protect them from what arrived 66 million years ago. The Cretaceous Ocean, at that point, was not obviously an ocean in trouble. Mosasaurs were in every ocean basin. The food chains they depended on were intact. There was no signal from inside the ocean that the entire system was within years of total collapse. What arrived did not come from inside the ocean. And what it did to the food chain, not to the predators directly, but to the foundation everything above them depended on, is what erased every marine reptile lineage from the fossil record. In a span of time, the geological record cannot meaningfully distinguish from a single moment. By the end of the Cretaceous period, the marine reptile lineages had been in the ocean for roughly 180 million years. In that time, they had survived the breakup of continents, the flooding and draining of inland seas, repeated shifts in global temperature, and the rise and fall of multiple competing predator groups. The end Permian extinction that had opened the ocean to reptiles in the first place had killed 96% of all marine species. The marine reptiles that arose from that devastation had then navigated every subsequent disruption the planet produced without losing their fundamental position at the top of the food chain. The Cretaceous Ocean, as it existed 66 million years ago, was not obviously an ocean in crisis. Mosasaurs were present in every ocean basin. Plesiosaurs, though reduced in diversity from their Jurassic peak, were still active predators in open ocean environments. Sharks were present and numerous. The fish communities that supported the upper levels of the food chain were intact. There was nothing in the ecological structure of the late Cretaceous ocean that would have indicated, to any observer capable of seeing it, that the entire system was within a few years of total collapse. The collapse did not come from within the ocean. It came from above it, specifically from the direction of the Yucatan Peninsula, where an object roughly 10 to 15 kilometers wide was crossing the final moments of its trajectory through the atmosphere. But the asteroid was not the only pressure on marine reptiles at 66 million years ago. Mosasaurs, by the final years of the Cretaceous, were already operating in an ocean that had been destabilized by the closure of the Western Interior Seaway, by declining sea temperatures in certain regions, and by the contraction of the shallow water habitats where their prey concentrations had historically been highest. The largest mosasaur species, the ones requiring the most food, the ones with the least flexibility in prey selection, were already under pressure before the impact. The asteroid did not strike a thriving, stable dynasty at its peak. It struck one that was already absorbing losses from multiple directions. But the marine reptiles had survived environmental disruption before. The Permian extinction, far more severe than anything the Cretaceous produced prior to the asteroid, had not prevented reptiles from entering and eventually dominating the ocean. Continental breakup, sea level change, temperature swings across tens of millions of years. None of these had broken the marine reptile lineages, which means the question is not simply why they died, but why this particular event, unlike every previous disruption, produced no survivors. Every mass extinction in Earth's history has left something behind. The end Cretaceous left nothing from the marine reptile side of the ledger. But the collapse that followed the impact worked differently from any previous disruption because it did not target specific species, specific habitats, or specific temperature ranges. It hit the mechanism that sustained every part of the ocean simultaneously, the process at the base of the food chain that everything above it, at every depth and in every basin, ultimately depended on. Previous disruptions had left alternatives. This one did not. When the base failed, every level above it failed with it, and the animals at the very top, the ones with the largest energy requirements and the least ability to wait out a collapse, had no distance left to fall. What the end Cretaceous extinction clarifies is that being the most powerful predator in your environment offers no protection whatsoever if the environment itself is destroyed. Mosasaurs, by 66 million years ago, were among the most successful large predators in the history of vertebrate life, present in every ocean basin, apex of every food chain. Physiologically specialized and ecologically established. None of that mattered when the asteroid hit. The mechanism was not direct. The impact itself killed everything within a vast radius. But mosasaurs were oceanic. Most of them were nowhere near the Yucatan Peninsula. What killed them was the collapse of the food chain. Sunlight disappeared under a global debris cloud. Phytoplankton, the photosynthetic base of the entire marine food chain, died within weeks. Zooplankton that fed on phytoplankton followed. The fish and cephalopods that fed on zooplankton followed after that. By the time the debris cloud began to clear, the base of the pyramid had already been gone long enough that every level above it had collapsed. Mosasaurs, sitting at the very top, were the last to feel it, but they felt it completely. The disappearance of every marine reptile lineage within what amounts to a geological instant is not a mystery. It is the predictable outcome of removing the foundation of a food chain that apex predators have no redundancy against. The last mosasaurs did not die fighting. They died in an ocean that had nothing left in it to eat. An entire dynasty. 180 million years of evolutionary history. Dozens of species, every ocean basin, was gone not because it was outcompeted, but because the world that had built it simply ceased to exist. But the ocean did not stay empty. What eventually entered the vacancy that 180 million years of marine reptile dominance had left behind was not a reptile and not a fish. It was a mammal wading in from the shore, small by the standards of what it would eventually become. The ocean that received it was already occupied. The challenges it faced were, in several respects, more extreme than anything the earliest marine reptiles had encountered. What it became, how long that transformation took by the standards of every transition that had come before it, and what the ocean today still lacks compared to what it once held. That is how this story ends. The ocean that existed in the first few million years after the end Cretaceous extinction was, by any ecological measure, impoverished. The apex predator positions that mosasaurs and plesiosaurs had occupied for tens of millions of years were empty. The prey communities those predators had depended on were only beginning to recover, rebuilding from the bottom of the food chain upward as photosynthesis slowly resumed and plankton populations restabilized. Large sharks persisted. Some lineages had survived the extinction, but even they were operating in a depleted ocean with fewer prey species and disrupted habitat structures. The ecological vacuum left by marine reptiles was not filled quickly. For millions of years, the ocean's upper predator tier remained thin, occupied primarily by sharks and large fish, rather than any single dominant group capable of claiming the kind of planetary scale apex position that mosasaurs had held. The absence was not just a gap in the predator community, it was a gap in the functional structure of the ocean's food web, in the pressure on prey populations, and in the evolutionary dynamics that predation from the top drives throughout an ecosystem. What eventually entered that vacuum was not a reptile. It was not a fish. It was a mammal that had spent the period since the extinction living near coastlines, wading into rivers and estuaries, and gradually committing more of its anatomy to the water. The animal was small by the standards of what it would become, and what is striking, looking back at the transitions that had come before it, is how quickly, by those same standards, the transformation from shore walker to ocean predator would happen again. But the mammal that began entering the water was not entering a vacant ocean. Sharks had survived the extinction. Bony fish had survived and were diversifying rapidly into the ecological space the extinction had opened. Early seabirds were developing diving capabilities. The ocean that Pakicetus and its descendants were moving into was not the empty, uncontested environment that reptiles had found after the Permian extinction. The competition was already there, already established, already adapted to the post-extinction ocean. Every step toward deeper water that the early whale ancestors took put them into proximity with animals that had been operating in that environment for millions of years longer. But the transformation from Pakicetus to a fully oceanic whale required changes that were, in several respects, more extreme than anything notosaurs or early ichthyosaurs had faced. Mammals, unlike reptiles, are endothermic. They generate their own body heat internally, which requires a continuous and substantial caloric intake that cold ocean water makes far more costly to maintain. The ocean heat strips a warm-bodied animal faster than almost any other environment on Earth. Early whale ancestors entering colder water were not just learning to swim, They were fighting a metabolic equation that required either a dramatic increase in food intake or the development of insulation, blubber, that reptiles, with their lower and more flexible metabolic rates, had never needed to produce. But the deepest loss in the transition from marine reptiles to whales is not physiological, it is scale and time. The marine mammal lineages in the ocean today are still, in geological terms, early in the process, 50 million years into an occupation that the reptiles before them sustained for 180 million, across a far broader range of body sizes, ecological roles, and predatory strategies than anything the ocean currently holds. The ocean that exists today is a different ocean from the one this story began in. The lineages that replaced what was lost are still accumulating the time, the diversity, and the evolutionary depth that 180 million years of continuous occupation had built, and have not yet come close to matching it. What the transition from marine reptile dominance to whale dominance demonstrates is that the ocean does not change its requirements. It only changes which animals are available to meet them. Pachycetus was a wolf-sized mammal wading in shallow water around 15 million years ago. Within 15 million years, its descendants had become fully oceanic, with flippers, reduced hind limbs, and bodies shaped almost identically to the ichthyosaurs that had gone extinct 40 million years earlier. The ocean produced the same solution twice, from entirely different starting material, under entirely different conditions, separated by tens of millions of years. That repetition is not coincidence. It is physics and biology working together on every animal that enters the water. Drag selects for streamlined bodies. Thrust requires a powerful tail or flipper system. Deep diving requires large lung capacity and a tolerance for pressure. Hunting fast prey in dark water requires either extraordinary vision or a substitute sensory system. Every large marine predator that has ever existed has answered these same problems, and the answers have always looked similar, regardless of the lineage producing them. Whales solved them with blubber, echolocation, and a horizontal tail. Ichthyosaurs solved them with a vertical tail, enormous eyes, and a body plan that dolphins would independently rediscover 200 million years later. The ocean carved a specific shape for the large predator, and every animal that has entered the water since has been pressed into a version of it, regardless of what it was before it entered. The whales alive today are not replacements for what was lost. They are the latest lineage to be shaped by the same pressures that shaped mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and plesiosaurs before them. The ocean has had to start over before. The fossil record shows exactly what it does when it does, and the answer it arrives at is always the same. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, the deep history of life on Earth, told slowly, subscribing means the next one will find you. Sleep well.